Thank you.
All right, let's bring in our political panel, which is transcontinental today. From the East Coast, Independent MP for Fowler, Di Lee's back with us. Welcome, Di. And from his own seat of Fremantle, where he hosted the Deputy Prime Minister, Labor MP Josh Wilson is with us. And Josh, we might go to you first. I'm not sure if Di's aware, but you had been holding this function, I guess hoping that the Dockers can direct more votes than they have goals of late. But let's leave that to one side. Josh Wilson, what evidence is there that these celebrity endorsements or sporting endorsements are doing anything for the campaign, in your case, the Yes campaign?
Well, thanks, Greg, and hi, Di. A bit of a rough intro there, Greg. My love and support for the Fremantle Football Club is undimmed, notwithstanding what's been a bit of a difficult season. But look, there's a big community campaign going on right around Australia, and rightly it involves all of us. It involves people in their own streets and communities and schools and all of the rest of it, but happily it does involve organisations like the Fremantle Football Club and the Geelong Cats, and indeed the AFL, showing their support for a incredibly well-founded and long-awaited sensible change in the direction of fairness and unity and better quality decision-making through constitutional recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and a consultative mechanism, a voice to Parliament.
Not showing up in the polls, though, would you acknowledge, Josh Wilson?
Well, it's like any election campaign. You know, you don't want to read too much into polls too early. I think at the beginning of the process, there was an indication that support was fairly good, and while these things always jump around, there are still a significant number of people that haven't made up their mind. And I know from my own experience, I've been door knocking as part of a community campaign in Fremantle over the last several weeks, and there are some people, when you say to them, are you looking forward to the referendum, actually say, what referendum? I mean, that's just right. The nature of the beast. It occurs with state and federal elections that some people who aren't overly engaged necessarily in current affairs and political ins and outs are only now really being engaged with this. But generally speaking, I've certainly found that people are positive, and where they haven't made up their mind, they're very, very glad to hear from fellow community members with information about the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the great opportunity and the momentous opportunity that lies ahead of us.
All right, well, Di Lee, I know from our previous discussions with you on this program, you were an early detector, if you like, of ambivalence in your own community towards the voice. Give us your latest analysis, though. Has anything shifted? Josh is talking about encountering, at least a few people in his part of the world who aren't seriously engaged yet. Is that still at large where you are?
Yes, Greg. Hi, Josh. Lovely to see you there in Fremantle. I'm here in sunny Fowler. As you can see, the sun is glaring into the office. Look, as you mentioned, Greg, it's from the start. My community is very disengaged with the issue, and I've always maintained. A lot of people here talk more to me about their electricity bills and cost of living issues rather than the voice. And, in the community, when I go out to community events, no one raised the issue of the voice with me. As a matter of fact, a couple of veterans RSL events that I've been to, a lot of the elderly, older Australians have kind of raised just a few handfuls. It's for them, what is this all about? Because of course they can express that themselves in English, so they will be more, coming up to me and say, this has nothing to do with our livelihood here. But that's just a few handful of elderly Australians who've expressed those issues, their concerns with me. But generally speaking, no, that my community at large is still not, like Josh referred to, people said, what's the referendum? What's that about? They're not engaged at all out here.
Well, that's part of the struggle, isn't it, for the Yes campaign, Josh Wilson? I don't think it's an artificial construction, and I don't want to overstate it either, but this binary balancing act between the everyday business of government, and obviously cost of living pressure would be a big priority there, and the voice race as this separate exercise that's been put before the nation. People are grappling with this in real life, aren't they? Looking to Canberra to say, hang on, fix the first one before we get to the second. Is that something you acknowledge, Josh?
I think Australians have sort of higher expectations of government and indeed of our community as a whole, to the extent that we're not incapable of doing a few things at the same time. And from the government's point of view, our highest priority at the moment is dealing with those cost of living pressures. It was the biggest part and the biggest focus of our government, and from the 1st of July, a whole series of things come into place along those lines: cheaper childcare, changes to make medicines cheaper. We're going to make going to the GP on a bulk build basis easier. All of those kinds of things. But at the same time, in every year, there are other things for us to consider. And this year, it's not just from one year to the next. It is essentially a kind of a once in a generation opportunity. And I don't think that Australians only ever expect one thing to be on the agenda. They expect more of themselves. I think we have that optimism and that sense of capability. So, I don't think that is an issue.
Yeah, no one's pretending that government or modern life in general isn't a complex business. Why don't we move on, Daili, to Commonwealth Games? And I thought I might come at it, since neither of you is Victorian, from a trust in politics point of view. Broken promises obviously aren't respected by the electorate these days. Is this a new standard that's being set by the Victorian government, that you ditch endeavours quite easily when you deem them to be unaffordable?
Look, from my perspective, Greg, I think that the issue for me here is obviously the fallout of it and the impact of the cancellation of the Games on athletes, on businesses, on our standing in the international community, irrespective of obviously what the Premier, Dan Andrews, the reason for his decision. So from my perspective, what does it mean for our athletes and other athletes around the world, or around the Commonwealth countries, who were looking forward to participate in this game and coming to Australia to take part in it? What does it mean for them, for their families, and for my understanding is regional Victoria would have benefited from this, and what would that mean for them as well? So that's really the question for me, is that when a decision such as this is made, what consideration has been given to those who've been going to be impacted by it?
And would you shed a tear, Di, if the Commonwealth Games ceases to exist internationally within the broader Commonwealth? If this ends up being a bit of a circuit breaker from which it never recovers, is that a loss in your experience as a viewer and, just a viewer, I suppose?
Look, I think Australia's a real sports fanatic. And I think it's more of a loss for the Australian sports, community, who seem to, we are an outdoor country. We participate in so many sporting activities, and it's not my personal opinion that will count. It's about how do Australians view this, and how important is the Commonwealth Games to them. And we participate in all of the major games, and this is a major, sporting activity in our daily, in the Australian kind of psyche.
No, it certainly has been a regular fixture. Whether it these days, Josh Wilson, represents the best of the best in elite sport, I suppose, is a debate we can have. But on the broken promise question, Josh, do you get the point of that question that I put to Daili? This would have to be corrosive of trust in commitments, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't think people want governments to avoid making decisions when they can see when the circumstances change and there's going to be a negative impact that was previously unforeseen. I don't think people want leaders or governments to just blindly plough on down that path when it becomes apparent that there are going to be significant negative consequences. I do feel for the communities in Victoria and for the athletes that were looking forward to it. I note that the Victorian government has made clear that they're going to maintain the funding commitments to a number of the projects that were going to benefit different parts of regional Victoria, and the Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles was talking about some of those in his electorate of Corio just before. So, it goes back to the topic we were talking about previously, and the balance of the voice and cost of living pressures and those kinds of things. I mean, in this case, the Victorian government has taken hold of the fact that it was going to be an extraordinary cost to hold these games, and that would compromise the ability of the government to invest in schools and health services and other things. And so they've made what appears from the outside to be a prudent decision in light of those changed circumstances to change their position.
I don't detect that you'd be clamouring for the WA government to pick it up, Josh, and I don't think we'd have to scratch you very deeply to discover your inner Republican. Is there a sense of, would there be a sense of relief at all if the Commonwealth Games, as a Republican, if the Commonwealth Games were to die a quiet death around now?
Oh, no. Look, I love sport. And I love the way that sport and events connect communities and can achieve other things. And we know through the Sydney Olympics and Kathy Freeman that and Nikki Winmar and our AFL football players that often sport can be a vehicle for other kinds of social and political change. So I have loved and will continue to love the Commonwealth Games. It's got nothing to do with my position as a Republican, but back to the question of where to from here. I mean, I take what the Premier of Western Australia, Roger Cook, has explained, which is that it's not really possible for Western Australia to step into that breach. I mean, that would be a remarkably risky and obviously untenable proposition.
Yeah, I understand that, but the only thing that could be said about WA is it's got an awful lot of money at the moment, more than New South Wales too, I think, Diley. Yeah, she's nodding in agreement. We might wrap it up there. Yeah, sure.
Well, mining.
Yeah, of course. They've got plenty of it.
Coming to Western Australia there, Josh.
Plenty of it in the West, yeah. Diley,
We're
Josh
hard-working
Wilson.
people here in Western Australia, Greg.
Yeah, we're not questioning that.
In Western Sydney, Josh. Engine of the country.
Let's wrap it up. Thanks to both. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.